Shabbat Zachor addresses the horror and trauma of the October 7th attack and its aftermath. Israelis have been traumatized, and we have all been terribly stressed and anxious. How do we get some relief during these troubling times? Can we find some form of contentment? When I asked Earle Goldman to address this, he said, quote, "This is what I do," end quote. Earle has been a clinical psychologist and teacher of psychotherapy for the past 50 years. He tries to help people become our best selves by tuning into our hopes, our talents, our possibilities, instead of just noticing our challenges and disappointments and failures. Tonight is Purim, a holiday about the trauma of anti-Semitism and the joy of overcoming it. Maybe Earle can help us find some contentment.
Oh my God.
Shakach.
Really? That's all I have to do? First of all, if any of you want to come closer, feel free. Originally, a drash is something that kind of is, for me, a place to live, a nest. It comes with me and it keeps changing. So for me to figure out what I'm doing, originally the title of this drash was going to be on being happy during miserable times. And then I thought, is happiness really our goal? I don't think so. We're not living to be happy all of the time. By the way, I also have to pay attention to the time. They say I have 15 minutes, and this is good for me because as a therapist, I always have a clock in front of the client, so they'll know how much time it is, and a clock in back of their shoulder, which is right up there, so I know how much time there is. So I will pay attention to that. And it's becoming the title on cultivating hope during seemingly hopeless times. Oops, what I forgot to do is bring up two things. Somebody please bring up for me a Chumash and a Siddur. So I was told I have to start with a joke. Actually, I don't know if this is a joke, but I had planned to talk about this sanctuary. I come to here through Ma'Or, through the Newton Centre Minyan and stuff like that, and the sanctuary first held sway in our family. By the way, I'm planning, I think my wife Janet is watching me now from home, and I say to her, make sure our kids watch me too, okay? One is in Seattle, one is in Atlanta. So go back 30 years. My 40-year-old son, going to be 40-year-old son, Adam Goldman-Yassen, is in Schechter, second grade, and they're taking him around to different shuls so that kids can see different things. Now, Adam grew up in a lay-led minyan. Got that? And they bring him here, and they sit him down, and they tell him about this place, and then they say, you see those chairs up there? That's where the rabbis sit. And Adam raises his hand and says, what's a rabbi? True story. True story. A second story of this sanctuary, whenever I come in, I think of the Starship Enterprise. Do you? Do you? Really? It's amazing. And therefore, when I'm up here now for the first time, I'm in the control deck, right? And what do I remember from Spock? Beam me up, Scotty. Right? So my job is to beam you up. I was very lucky having grown up in a family that often could be negative. I mean, they were loving, they were nice, but they would talk about people and they would worry about things all the time. My mother was the kind of person who, when I was learning how to drive and somebody was slow in front of me and I was beeping my horn, she would say, don't beep your horn, that guy may have a knife and come out and kill you. So I learned how to deal with hopelessness, right? And difficulty. But here is the notion. Our job, both the clergy here, the rabbis who sit here, where is Michelle? Back there, hi, and therapists are very much in the same category. When I teach my students about what a therapist is, We are in the tradition of the clergy. The clergy are the people who were given that job of holding the hope for the community, holding the spiritual path, holding the possibilities, especially a time of difficulty and crisis. Once we had a secular state, a nation state, we had to create a whole other group of people called therapists, called counselors, seriously, in which we were embodied figuring out a secular way to do what is done within a tradition like yours. So we've got the same job. How do we do it? What do we do? I would say in our tradition, we have two major books. We have the Chumash, we have the Siddur. I would suggest the Chumash, in psychological terms, is DSM, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, meaning these are the problems. What happens in the Chumash? God creates this beautiful world, right? You know how many sentences we get to live in that beautiful world? 3 sentences. Before, what do? We say, God? Who needs God? We've got a snake to tell us what to do. And we get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Then, think that was a problem? God repents for creating humanity and says, I'm going to send a flood. Think about climate change, right? And it only rescues one family. Go to the first siblings. One kills the other sibling, right? And finally, when God finally found Moses as the person he can speak to, or she can speak to, or they can speak to, face to face, before the end of the Torah, Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land and is killed off. So what I would suggest to you, in fact, is this is the book of tragedies in many ways. This is the book of challenges. This is the book of difficulties, and I will tell you, even though I was thinking I shouldn't tell you this because you don't want to put too much in a drash, my good friend Bert Vysotsky from Jewish Theological Seminary tells the story that when he first got to Jewish Theological Seminary, Shaul Lieberman, who was the professor of Talmud, asked him, who is the most tragic figure in the Chumash? And he thought, was it Adam who was thrown out? Was it Moses who couldn't get in? He said, no. God is the most tragic figure in the Chumash. God, who is all-powerful, God, who is all-almighty, is trying to figure out how to deal with these people that God has created to be a partner. And it is that human condition that we are all dealing with. How we deal with it? Treatment plan. Right? What is the Siddur telling us? Let me give you 3 kinds of, I'm glad you said, Ellie, 3 kinds of things, because that's as much as we can hold in our minds. 3 ways we deal with the human condition. First thing, with all of these problems, and all of these problems we have seen, I'm just back from Israel a month ago, we have not just the tragedy of what happened on October 7th, but the breaking of a belief that somehow a Jewish state would prevent this from ever happening, that the army will protect us, that the government will protect us. Guess what? We don't have that protection. We come from a world, building on Ellie's stuff, growing up in the Irish part of Dorchester. I know that all of my neighbors thought of me as a Christ killer. That's what happened. That's what you knew. And you know what happened since then? The church has decided we're not Christ killers. All of a sudden, we're in a different position, and things do move. But anti-Semitism is coming back, and we're dealing with it. How do we deal with it? So first, we open up the Siddur, and the first thing we say is, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. In spite of all of these difficulties, in spite of all of these problems, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob? From a non-Jewish prophet who's been hired to curse the Jews. He sees the beauty of what we have. And then we go on to all of the brachot and Psukei de Zimra, which says, Thanks that I can walk. Thanks that I can breathe. Thanks that I can do this. What is this in psychological terms? In psychological terms, we have what's called, of course, when I think of this and I want the name, it's not there, but what's the predisposition to worry? What's it called? You don't know, we'll figure it out. It's a predisposition to worry, which means that our attention first has to go to where our threats are. This is very important because otherwise we're not going to survive. And if we don't survive, we certainly are not going to thrive. But what happens to that thriving that we can forget about? Siddur says, pay attention to what you've got. Pay attention to what's beautiful in your life. Pay attention to that rose, even and especially during crisis times when you think that there's nothing good in your life. And you have to do that in a way that pushes you and gives you a ritual to do it. One way is to daven. Another way is to go to a therapist. The job of a therapist is very simple. People ask me, oh, don't you get depressed listening to everybody's problems? The joke about that, of course, is I'll answer, who's listening? But in fact, the real answer to this is, I'm not listening to their problems. I'm listening to their potential. I'm noticing what they can do. I'm noticing the beauty of their lives in a way they can't notice it and we can't notice it for ourselves, right? And that's why my 30 years of being in therapy has been so useful to me too, that I'm able to overcome that worry about the mother who says you're going to get killed with a knife, right? And say, oh, but I have to pay attention to this other stuff too. First level of dealing with hope and building in hope. Second level, and I connect this with the term in the Kedusha and before the Shema, Am Hamyachadim Shemo. We are the people who bring together God's name. What I take that to mean is, God has this conflict too. I have this all possibility, and yet I'm creating these people who have their own will. What's going to happen here? It's up to us to figure out what our lives are going to be, what the purpose of our life is, what's the meaning of our life. In doing that, that inherently brings the notion of hope and possibility. As I'm sitting with that client and imagining what their possibilities are, they are taking on their new possibilities. As I'm sitting here with you, trying to beam you up, I am hoping and seeing from all that's gone before here, the beauty that you create in this community. And that beauty has to be connected through individual connections, through small group connections. And look what's happened already, that you notice that you've created in this sanctuary, in this community, to allow that hope to happen. So we have blessings, we have meaning in life leading to hopefulness. Finally, and this is the hardest one to understand, I believe, is the notion of hoping during hopelessness, or hopelessness bringing you to hope. This is the wisdom literature. This is Eicha, Ecclesiastes, that says, good people can have miserable lives. Bad people can have wonderful lives. What does this mean? It's all hevel. It's all an illusion, in fact. And to understand that is to get to a higher point. Let me check where I am now. That Kohelet is really manifest, especially tonight in Purim. Because what happens in Purim, we allow ourselves to change who we think we are. We allow ourselves to dress up. Ultimately, we have what's called the Adalo Yada. In the Talmud, they talk about how drunk should you get. And it says, you should get as drunk that you don't know the difference between blessing Mordechai and cursing Haman. What a strange thing. What does it mean here? I would suggest, in fact, it's the same notion of Amalek, of remember Amalek, to forget him. In a certain way, the solution of this comes to me from Abbott and Costello, followed up by hearing it in Hebrew when I was in Israel. This scene went like, Abbott says to Costello, or Costello says to Abbott, I don't remember who they are. So how you doing? Well, I'm not doing so good, says the other one. You know, my son just broke his leg. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you don't have to be sorry. In fact, it might be good because then he's not going to have to go into the army and there he might be killed. Oh, I'm happy for you. No, you don't have to be happy because then how's he going to get a job after that? It's the very notion that we should take a moment every once in a while to understand the whole dichotomy between good and evil. Excuse me, since I've never had this on. Right, David? Okay. Is a false one. And God creates good and evil. What does this mean recently? Another son. Got that? You're going to see a lot of my family in this drush. A son, Zachary, my younger son, who's about 35 years old. You're going to... Thank you. Better?
Better.
Thank you. Zachary, my son, who's 35 years old, who throughout his life has this struggle with Judaism. And no, I don't want it, I don't care about it, I don't feel connected to it, it's not really me. And we've kind of dealt with it by loving him anyway and feeling a little bit lost about it, but he's got a really good life and he's a real good mensch, which is what I wanted for my kids in the first place. 2 weeks ago, we hear from him, and he says, oh, my girlfriend who teaches has this Israeli student there, and the Israeli student is feeling bereft, and you've gone to Israel. Could you send me a list of all of our friends in Israel and how we know them so we can give comfort to this girl? A week later, he says he works at a rock climbing gym as a head setter, which is what his goal has been for the last 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, who knows, you know, time flies when you have kids. Says, in my rock climbing gym, they're doing a benefit for the Palestinian rock climbers. And he said, and I think we should also do a benefit for the Israeli rock climbers. I can't tell you how, as parents, we felt, wow, I guess it really worked, some of the stuff that we were doing, some of the way we connected. And in this way, we see how the threat of anti-Semitism not only is bad, but also in a certain way is good. Perhaps we've protected our kids too much. Perhaps in those 70 years of feeling like we're part of this, we forgot about how threats could be coming. We forgot about all of the threats of the Chumash, and needed to also have this notion of understanding that we have to be prepared for things too, and that this can come to us, and that these changes that we may think are so horrible could also be possible. This is said in the Gemara also. Two things. Job gets destroyed, right? He says to his friends, what are you doing? That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Finally, God comes to him and says, where were you when I created the world? What kind of answer is that? I would say Job's answer was that God came to him. In creating these connections, we are creating people in this image of God who can come to us and can offer us hope and can offer us possibility, so much so that in the Talmud, when Rabbi Akiva is walking past the destruction of the Churban Habayit, of the High Temple, he laughs and sings, and his friend says, how can you laugh and sing? And they say to him, he says to them, look, there was a prophecy this will be destroyed. But there was also a prophecy we're going to return and we're going to be flourishing. If that prophecy was true and there is this destruction, the other one will come true too. It is on these three levels the brachot that we're saying, the meaning that we have in our life, and the ultimate understanding that we really never know what's good and what's bad, and that this coming together of community through the brotherhood, that I thank so much for inviting me to speak here, creates those possibilities from how we're connected to each other. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.